Hello and welcome to the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Green Spring Center for Lifelong Learning. I'm Tamara Sheasley Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about essential truths for successful inclusion in the Montessori classroom. My guest today is Andrée Rolfe. Andrée has been serving children with learning challenges for 50 years. The first 37 years were in public special education as a special education teacher, learning specialist, administrator, and university instructor. In 2012, Andrée fulfilled a decades-old intent and came to the Washington Montessori Institute for elementary training. Since 2013, she has been teaching Montessorians about learning differences and inclusion strategies. So, welcome, Andrée. We're so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here.
It's such an honor to be invited, and thank you for having me.
Well, I tell you what, you're doing such important work around supporting Montessori classrooms in meeting the needs of children, and we know that the needs of children seem to be increasing, and we're so we're going to dig in today with you into what are these essential truths that will make a difference for our guides in the classroom as they're supporting these children of all different neurotypes. And so you have developed really these essential truths or guidelines that you share with folks. And do you want to share a little bit about just how you develop those?
I do. I've been involved in supporting children with challenges for over 50 years in a variety of different settings. I'm a latecomer to Montessori. I have a lot to share, and I'm very passionate about it. And I look at these guidelines as my hard-earned insights, the kinds of the kinds of guidelines that exist over time, over planes of development, over different kinds of Montessori settings. And they should serve to enable the adult to transform in a way that'll enable them to serve more children well. So these are the kinds of beliefs that inform what you do and how you do it rather than a new set of tools to add to your toolbox.
Mm. I love that. Because didn't Dr. Montessori tell us that the work of the adult is our own transformation? It's our own spiritual preparation, it's our own reflection and work, and that is what we see in action with the children. There's a direct impact.
Absolutely.
Okay, so well, let's dig in. Let's dig in. What's your first essential truth?
Essential truth number one is make that which is implicit explicit. The work that I do involves figuring out what's going on with a child who presents with a challenge. And regardless of the difficulty, it could be language development, motor development, sensory processing, social skills, reading, writing, math, executive function, attention. My role is to discover what gives rise to the challenge and to develop adaptations and supports. So, first, I need to determine what it is that's implicit to the learner. It could be how to ask for help, how to use playground equipment, how to calm oneself, how to accept no from a peer or an adult, how to decode a multisyllabic word, how to organize sentences into paragraphs, how to choose or organize work, how to sustain attention long enough to participate in a lesson. Then I need to determine a way to make that which is implicit explicit.
Okay,
In
so
other
hold on.
words,
Can I just really quick? So when you say implicit, I want to make sure that our listeners know what you mean by implicit. So you're saying what is it for the child that is a stop or a difficulty?
yes, because the task is to recognize where the child gets stuck and to decide how to assist them in moving forward. The
Hmm.
reason for becoming stuck might be an unmet need driving behavior. It could be a lagging skill impacting learning or socializing, or it could be an obstacle, which could be a situation, trauma, a diagnosed condition or disability that's thwarting physical, emotional, or cognitive development.
Well, and I think the other thing that it could be nowadays, I mean, all of those for sure, but also we're finding that children are coming in and that parents aren't sure how to have boundaries with children. So sometimes
Mhm.
having kind, firm, loving boundaries feels new, and even that is can thwart their ability to be successful in the classroom. So there's so many things, but I just want to add that piece because I think that at least that's something that we're really um, seeing more of now.
I agree. And that truly impacts the child's sense of becoming independent and the parent's sense of the value of that. We
Hmm.
see that
Hmm.
today for sure.
Okay, so I didn't mean to interrupt you. I want to hear more about the making that which is implicit explicit.
So, when we support children who have challenges, we may need to expand our practice. And my training as a learning specialist tells me that we need to provide direct instruction. Direct instruction is goal directed, explicit, and mastery based. So, when a difficulty is not resolved through our Montessori practice, we need to find out what else is known about specific skill sequences and supports. And looking at that information through a Montessori lens, we can then assess what the child knows now, consider ways to present the next skill explicitly, offer and monitor practice, and then assess their growth.
Just quick question. So that could that be like a grace and courtesy lesson for a child? Would that be considered explicit direct instruction around something?
I, mm, yes, and it would
Yes,
depend on how that grace and courtesy lesson is presented. It c Grace and courtesy lessons can be presented in a way that's indirect, and they can be presented in a way that's more direct. So, coming from special education, a grace and courtesy lesson might look more like a social story for a child, where you're taking the situation and you're individualizing what you want the child to know based on the child's own experience in language that would be very explicit and understandable to them. So I see the grace and courtesy lesson as a really, really important tool, but you want to make sure that it's direct enough to have an impact and enable the child to take the new information, develop a new way of responding to a situation, and generalize it.
okay, so can you give us an example of a grace and courtesy lesson that would be have the direct instruction that you're pointing to?
An example might be how to accept no when a child would like to work with another child.
Mhm.
And so, in a typical grace and courtesy lesson, there would be a lot of words around it. There would be a lot of conversation around it. And there might be some role play with it. But if we need to make it more explicit, one approach that I've come to know that works very well is introducing children to the terms available and unavailable. Sounds like a big word for young children. They love the two words. And the understanding if a peer is available, they may work with them. And if the peer is unavailable, then they have chosen to work alone. So in classrooms, we can make available and unavailable cards. Often available is green, unavailable is red. And the children can take those cards and place them on their mats while they're working so that others or a particular child will know if they are available to be a partner or if they're not choosing not to be available at that time. So you're taking the grace and courtesy lesson and you're making it very explicit with some visuals that are going to serve as prompts for the child who needs to learn how to accept no from a peer.
Oh, I have never heard that. And what a great idea for children who, particularly, I can think of the children who may be impulsive or they can't hold that information from the last lesson, and they can't it's hard for them to recognize because they wanna connect, right? They're seeking
Mhm.
that connection, and then they have that visual to support their success.
Mhm.
Right? I'm okay, thank you. That's very helpful, and I will share with you if you have any other examples. I think that is just so very helpful.
That is a strategy that I learned from a behaviorist. And so part of my reason for being in the Montessori community is to say there are so many things that we know from the wider field of specialists and supports that can be adapted through a Montessori lens and used very successfully in classrooms to help children move along in their development.
Mm, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so I kind of interrupted you, and I know you have more to share, but thank you because that was really useful. And so I please continue.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little more about this notion of direct instruction because to many Montessorians, it is not very Montessori.
Mm,
So, as guides, we are constructivists. We follow the child's interests and we honor their sensitive periods. We know young children have absorbent minds and they develop many skills through indirect preparation. And we know that older children are driven by their reasoning minds and their social nature to explore and learn. Direct instruction is very different from indirect preparation, and it's not fueled by exploration and choice. It's used by every kind of therapist: speech, language, occupational therapist, physical therapist, Orton Gillingham tutors. It's designed to develop those lagging skills that have caused a child to become stuck.
mm, mhm, mhm. And so really what you're doing is you're isolating the difficulty. You're
Mhm.
isolating the specific skill or need, and you're looking for a direct instruction that will support the child in building that specific skill. Would you be able to give us another example of something maybe outside of grace and courtesy, a way you've seen this used in a Montessori setting to serve a child?
Certainly, in terms of phonological development for a young child, we have sound games, and they are presented often in large groups, small groups. Sometimes children need to have a sequence that is more specific, developed for them. The new science of reading research will tell us that there are more and longer levels of phonological awareness that children go through in terms of their development. And so you can adapt your sound games so that they have more depth and have more practice and move farther along in a sequence for children who are not readily moving into from sound games into reading.
Mhm, mhm. And so you would actually break down the letters more. I'm trying to get granular here just for
Mhm.
folks who are listening and really
Mhm.
thinking, what would that look like in in practice in the classroom? Like,
Mhm.
how would they meet that need? More
Well,
e
I'm talking about going outside of Montessori practice, outside of your albums, looking at what exists. There's a Hegarty curriculum that breaks the components of phonological awareness into very, very specific sequential levels. And so you would use that as a resource to enhance your collection of prompts that you're using with children in your classroom for sound games. So
Mhm,
I think of that kind of direct application and direct instruction as a bridge to your destination of moving along in the Montessori sequence.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Okay. So really what you're recommending is that as you have children who the curriculum as designed by Dr. Montessori, that they can't be met by necessarily that framework, that we're really looking to bring in additional structures for direct instruction that could support that same to support the child's development within the framework of the Montessori classroom.
Yes, I think that is the key to how we can serve more children well.
Can you do that within the framework of the individual lessons and meet and use the Montessori individual or small group lessons in this work?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So
I think of direct instruction as a bridge to your destination, what you're going to do for a short period of time to boost that lagging skill. Some children are going to need more direct instruction throughout their school career, depending on what their learning profile is. And we need to know what their strengths are, where their challenges are, and how those challenges impact their learning.
mhm, mhm. Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else you wanna add about essential truth number 1?
No, because essential number truth number 2 is a follow-up to essential truth number 1.
Okay, let's go to number 2.
Essential truth number 2 is the key to mastery is repeated effortful practice. And I'd like to tell a story about a child named Sean. When Sean entered the casa, he had just turned 3. He was communicating in single words and there were articulation delays. He had difficulty expressing his needs and wants. There were many tantrums. Sean was drawn to practical life and sensorial activities for much of his first year and into his second year. He participated in 8 months of speech and language therapy paid for by his family, and he made progress. He became more communicative and socially involved. Sean showed a strong interest in mathematics, and he avoided the language shelves. At the age of 4, he could not recognize rhyme. He struggled with sound games, and he resisted lessons with sandpaper letters. I was called in at the beginning of Sean's 3rd year, shortly after he turned 5. His guide was perplexed. She kept repeating the same language lessons because she felt that he had forgot what he seemed to know the day before. Sean was frustrated. He was aware that other children were reading, and each day he angrily pulled their books away from them and tried to hide them. We focused on developing Sean's phonological skills, the sound skills that form the foundation of reading. His guide adapted lessons for rhyming, identifying initial, final, and medial sounds, and making sound symbol connections. To hold Sean's attention, the lessons needed to be short, direct, and fun. But to master any of these skills, the key was repeated, effortful practice. What another child mastered quickly required 10 or more practice sessions for Sean. What another child practiced independently required a guide on the side for Sean. His practice needed to be adapted. His practice choices were teacher directed, and when short guided practice happened every day, the skills developed over a period of time. With a sequence from the Orton Gillingham approach, Sean learned most consonant sounds and short A. He began to encode CVC words with short A using the movable alphabet. He plateaued for almost 2 months. That was a frustrating, concerning time. But then things started to click and progress resumed. In May, Sean could encode CVC words with short A, short I, and short O. He was not yet able to blend sounds into words. He quickly picked up on puzzle words and was eager to practice them every day. He learned 16 puzzle words, and he became unstuck. We knew what was needed for him to move forward as he transitioned to lower elementary.
Mm, what a beautiful story. So when you're working with Sean, because part of, for example, in our children's house classroom, we're asking our children's house guides to work towards 20 lessons a day, giving 20 lessons a day. And so one of the things that can be challenging is if you're going back and practicing with children that you're looking at the impact on the rest of the class. And I'm
Mhm.
curious about how I'm assuming that you're not giving the full lesson again because that would feel frustrating to him. That's what he was frustrated about before. So when you're talking about a practice session, really what does that look like?
Well, the guide would determine where the child is, what skill they need to practice, and there are some guidelines for making adaptations. So you need to know that the adaptations will be critical for the practice to be productive. You need to know that the practice and follow up work will be different for a child in their area of their learning challenge. You need to know that within that set of practice activities that you develop for the child, the choice will really depend on how many ways the guide can change it up because the child needs a lot of practice with the same thing over a period of time. The repetition may be needed longer than you ever imagined, and the movement to the next skill in the sequence should only happen after you've observed mastery.
Mhm. So you're really going in for these short, very intentional practice sessions. So let's say it's sandpaper letters.
Mhm.
You're not starting from scratch. You're going and you're grabbing the 3 that he did yesterday, or maybe in his case it's 2 or 1,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it can be a 90-second moment of your day where you're having him practice those back to you, or maybe he's building them and he's there in his a book, or it's a quick knock talk game. Can any of that be done with an older student?
Well, yes. Do you mean with an older student in the classroom?
Correct. Correct.
Yes, of course. Your 5-year-olds are usually thrilled to help out, and they need one or two demonstrations on how that might be different from the way they learned how to do something. I've seen partnerships form among children that are so valuable and joyful. And the older children truly delight in the child who's having a challenge success.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Great. Great. And so of your 5 adaptations, which where do people start?
Well, I think that the choice is the changing up the practice is critical. If a child's just doing the same thing day after day, it gets heavy. It gets to be just a chore. And
And boring. It becomes
As
boring.
Yeah, as you described the joy, the child needs to understand. The child knows that this isn't coming easily, and the child needs to feel in their head and in their heart that you, as the guide, know what to do. You are
Mm,
going to make this happen. You have charted a course and you're taking the child with you on this journey, and it will be exciting. There will be successes, and it's going to take hard work. And so there's a lot of reflection that is transmitted to the child in terms of, look what you can do now. Look what you did today. Tomorrow, we might try 3 sounds. Tomorrow, we might look at the sounds that we worked on last week and see what you're ready to do with them. I would take out the language of what you remember or what you don't remember. We never want to add it was correct or it was accurate for a young child. And so there needs to be some Montessori drama about it. And you need to be as excited about this as you might be about showing work that is very advanced to a child who's just soaring through their reading development.
mm, mhm, mhm. I love those examples. Thank you. And I think that that is the work of the guide, is to come in each day is a new day. And
Mhm.
really what is the gift of that day? And it's really easy to get down when we see a child struggling and to feel. I think what one of the things that happens with guides is often we take it personally and it feels
Mhm.
like a personal failing rather
Mhm.
than looking at it as an opportunity for us to build our practice and for us to learn some new skills so that we can support children who are coming into the world who need something a little different. And
Mhm.
that's Dr. Montessori told us very directly. She said, if you're not experimenting, if you're not observing, if you're not trying things, you're not doing the method. I mean, she wanted us to be scientific observers. She wanted us to look at each day anew. She wanted us to do the spiritual work to come in and provide for that child their their joy of learning even when they don't have it, and
Mhm.
teach them that they that I mean, really that their spirit is their unique perfect spirit, and it's okay if things come a little harder in some areas. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and isn't that beautiful that we're just a rainbow of different kinds of people? So thank you. I really appreciate that framework. Um, okay, are we ready to move on to number 3, or did you have
We
anything you
can.
wanted to add? Okay, great.
One thing came to mind when you were just talking. Just as we share our ability to regulate with children and model it, we also have to share our belief and we have to share with them the sense that this will happen. We want them to feel the excitement that it may take longer and we will get there. With Sean, when he plateaued for 2 months, that was a really, really, really hard time. It would be easy to say, "I tried everything and nothing worked." You keep with it because some children need many more repetitions before the learning becomes solid, before it becomes internalized, and before they can generalize it. And when it appears as though a child knew something in a lesson and then they forgot it the next day, they didn't really forget because they never fully learned it.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
space between being in a lesson, practicing, and then doing it independently, there are many drop off points in there where a child doesn't go from a lesson to practice to internalization and generalization. So that's what we need to be looking at, and that's what we need to be finding so we know where to give that extra practice and extra lessons.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, that's great. I appreciate, and so you're really paying attention to they I you know, read a great book by Dan Coyle called The Talent Code, and he
Mhm.
digs into how people really become extraordinary in different areas. And part of what they do is they isolate the difficulty. They're isolating the specific difficulty and working on that specific difficulty,
Mhm.
not doing the whole thing again, right? They're looking at, so if you're, I'm a pickleball enthusiast, and so I'll just use, you know, there at the net in pickleball, there's this thing called dinking, and rather than working on all your dinking, if you're having trouble with your backhand specifically, you're going to go and just
Mhm.
do the backhand over and over. And I
Mhm.
think that's really what you're saying is you're going to find that difficulty and focus on that, because if you go back to the whole thing, that you lose them, right? And so we really have to be paying that close of attention.
Mhm. And you're back to finding out what it is that's implicit for the child. Where did they get stuck? What doesn't make sense to them?
That's right.
And then how can you turn it inside out, upside down, around and around so that it does?
Right. And do it in a kind of a different way every day. So this day if let's say we're working on sound. So this day you might have your sandpaper letters out, and this day you may um, have them. I have a guide who will actually put them out and has them say them, and she does a line around, and then they use glue, and then they put sequence around, and
Mhm.
they're saying,
Mhm.
like there's just, and of course they think that that is the best thing ever,
Of course.
right? And they get to take it home and work on the sound at home, and
Mhm.
it supports the families with knowing how to say the sound, right? Which is not necessarily an easy thing to
Known.
train
Mhm.
our families in. So anyway, okay, we're gonna move on to number 3 because I
Okay.
know I really am enjoying this conversation. Okay, so number 3.
Essential truth number 3. Reactive behavior is the child's attempt to communicate. So I expect that everyone can identify with this situation. As we sit down to meet after school, it's clear that Rochelle, a primary guide, is upset. She tells me, Julia is a challenging child. She's giving me a hard time. She runs out of the room. She refuses to follow directions. She has anger issues. I have tried everything and nothing works. I know we've all been there. I know we can all recall the last time that we felt a child was giving us a hard time. So as I'm listening, I'm reframing what Rochelle said. I'm thinking that Julia is having a hard time, not that she is giving Rochelle a hard time. This reactive behavior is Julia's attempt to communicate her unmet needs to Rochelle. And I'm thinking that Rochelle is experiencing this personally because she's feeling ineffective. Well, behavior is the number one concern of primary and elementary guides. And I learned from Pam Shanks in her book, The Montessori Approach to Classroom Based Interventions, that challenging behavior describes the adult experience, and reactive behavior describes the child's experience. And that makes all the difference. So, as sure as the sun rises in the east, children will communicate their behavior until they feel heard and understood. And I've come to know that all the successful Montessori approaches, the Nautilus approach developed by Elizabeth Slade, positive discipline for the Montessori classroom, Jane Nelson and Chip DiLorenzo, collaborative and proactive solutions by Ross Green, or the support of a behaviorist, all of these Montessori approaches attempt to figure out what's going on with the child by first considering the child's unmet needs. There are 4 common unmet needs, and I use the acronym EATS, EATS, to remember them. E is the need to escape a situation. A is the need for attention. T is the need for a tangible object or place. And S is a sensory need. So let's explore how each unmet need might give rise to Julia's running out of the room. If the unmet need is escape, Julia might be running out of the room because she's missing her mom and she wants to see if mom's car is in the parking lot, maybe 17 times a day. If the unmet need is attention, Julia might be running out of the room because she knows that an adult will chase her through the hallways. If the unmet need is for a tangible object or a place, Julia might be running out of the room to get her soft new hat that her grandma gave her from her cubby, which is out in the hallway. If the unmet need is sensory, Julia might be running out of the room because she can't handle the noisy transition of cleanup. And all approaches to supporting reactive behavior also involve observing patterns and considering what's known as the ABCs. A is for antecedent, and that's what happens before a behavior occurs. B is the behavior, and you need a very objective description of what the child does and the frequency, intensity, and duration of that behavior. And C is for consequence. That's what happens in the environment after the behavior that reinforces that behavior pattern. And it's really important to understand that this definition of consequence is different from the traditional meaning of consequence as a punishment.
Mhm.
So the task is to identify the unmet need that gives rise to the reactive behavior, and then teach the child a new, more functional behavior to take the place of the reactive behavior.
Okay, so just before we keep going, I really want to underscore how important this is. We just had this experience. We had a child who was new in Children's House who was being very physical with older children, and thank goodness she we really dug in to see what was going on with her, and hers was an A. She realized that when she realized that when she would be physical with the other children, that she would get the attention of the guide and the other child as they would go and sit and talk about it and have
Mhm.
a peace table conversation. And so it was very interesting that as soon as we removed that for her and really worked on her having these positive attention opportunities and connections, that the behavior has evaporated. So just another example of how really how these make it can make such a difference to see exactly what that need is.
I agree with you totally. One phrase that repeats itself over and over in my mind, which comes from positive discipline, is connection before correction. And children who we determine are seeking attention very often have not formed the connections that they need with the adults and with the other children in the classroom. And so teaching a new way to respond will not be effective until those connections are strengthened. And
Mhm.
that's a possibility here for Julia as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. I really appreciate that. And actually one of the things that we have been working on with our internally with our staff as well is when a child you're always the connection is first. But sometimes you have a child who is so dysregulated, you actually can't start with connection. You have to
Mhm.
actually start with regulation and that is actually silent. You can go
Mhm.
sit next to the child and be present and send them love and well wishes, because it doesn't work if you're sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, hope they hurry up. I'm so frustrated," and
Mhm.
you're processing. You literally have to be sending. I mean, this actually comes from conscious discipline. Dr.
Mhm.
I think her Bichard is her last name, Becky Bichard, and but I really appreciated that sometimes you have a child who is so dysregulated and just needs to be in the energy and the space and needs the adult to regulate them. And then you can
Mhm.
connect and
Mhm.
then they can reason. But you
Mhm.
cannot skip those steps. And even that you may not be able to have them connect. I had a little one the other day. I walked in and he was crying, and I tried to skip just that initial regulation and go straight to connection, and he didn't really want much to do with me until I gave myself over to that moment of really the regulation. So, anyway, I got us a little bit off topic here, but I thought that was important to share as well.
Agreed.
So, okay, so how might each unmet need lead to a different supportive response? Like, if you want to use Julia as an example, that'd be
Mhm.
great.
Okay. So we're back to Julia running out of the room. And if the unmet need is escape because Julia is missing mom, she can carry a picture of mom, and the guide could provide a visual schedule of the day so Julia can anticipate when mom will arrive. Visual schedules have a lot of uses particularly at the primary level, with photos of what happens during the day. Uh, if a child isn't able to anticipate how long this day will last, what do we need to do, and when is it that I will see my caretaker again? You can use visual schedules for many applications in the primary classroom, but this would be helpful for Julia. If the unmet need is attention leading to a chase around the building, Julia might benefit from lessons and practice about how to get Rochelle's attention. That may be what is implicit to her. It's also likely, I would think, that Rochelle needs to work on enhancing her connection with Julia, because connection is always critical in the process of resolving reactive behavior. It could be that Julia presents with some more serious or um, less well developed physiological reactions to the environment in a state of dysregulation a lot of the time. And of course, I agree with you totally. The dysregulation needs to calm before any connection would happen. But even in times of dysregulation, if a child has developed this connection with the adult, there's a lot that more that will happen that is positive for the child.
Mhm. Mhm.
S- So if the unmet need is a tangible object or a place, we're back to the new hat in Julia's cubby. Rochelle could say, "You can't go to your cubby and get your hat now, but you can later when we go outside," connected in time to something that Julia can anticipate. Or the guide could say, "You can't get your hat now, but you can," and then suggest a preferred work in the classroom. It might only need a small distraction, or it might need more reassurance that you will get your hat later. It's not gone from you forever.
Or
And
you
then,
could say, "I just need to add one." I mean, the hat is an interesting example because the child could wear the hat during the work cycle, right?
yeah,
We have children who wear particularly winter hats in the winter all day long. And so I think unless it's a big distracting hat or something, that is such a way for us to offer a little flexibility with a child who has a need. Now, if it's a big purple
light
barn
up hat with
light,
reindeer ears. Yeah.
I that's a whole different thing, and we can talk to the child about why. it would be hard to have that in the classroom because it might make it hard for their friends to work and for them.
Mhm.
But I think that there's also an opportunity there to look and see how we can be flexible and how we can meet the child's need even in the
Mhm.
room.
Mhm. So, if the unmet need is sensory because cleanup is noisy, Rochelle can make changes so it's quieter for everyone. It may not just be Julia who's struggling with this. And she might offer Julia headphones during cleanup. That's also a possibility.
Mhm, mhm. Right. We have a number of students who need headphones, and they manage their own headphone use
Hmm.
of when they need them or don't need them, right? So, excellent, excellent. Okay, we're gonna go to number 4 because we
Okay.
are getting close on time, and I know we have so much more wisdom here that we'd like to get. So, so what's number 4?
Essential truth number 4 is regarding supports, never say never. And this is a story from my public school years that I have brought with me to Montessori. I learned to never say never from David. He was one of the first children on the autism spectrum to move through general education with special education supports in the K 8 public school where I was learning consultant. For years, our occupational therapist, Cindy, pleaded with me to allow David to chew gum in school. She insisted it would give him the input he needed in his mouth to stop sucking his thumb and later to stop biting his cuticles. Of course, I said no repeatedly. Gum in school? There are so many reasons why not. Everyone would want to chew gum. It would be distracting to David and the other children. Gum would get stuck on the chairs, the tables, the walls. It's so hard to clean. Chewed gum spreads bacteria. David or others would make gum noises and disrupt lessons. Swallowing gum is a choking hazard. And it's disrespectful and inappropriate. Concentration would be compromised. And gum is not allowed, and the rules should not be broken. So, as a fourth grader, David returned to school significantly more anxious, and his fingernail beds were bloody and scabbed from constantly pulling at his cuticles. He was a mess, and I was visualizing his fingers awake and in my dreams. And to my mind, it was no longer a choice. I said yes and charged Cindy with creating a plan that would result in the least amount of distraction and minimize what I would call the contagion effect, which is if David can, why can't I? And so I held my breath and I waited for the fallout. Here's the thing, there was none. The other children and their parents got it and were incredibly supportive. The biggest problem was the number of times per day that David refreshed with new pieces of gum and the number of tissues that he used to catch his excess saliva. He stopped picking his cuticles, he became less anxious, his cognitive and academic strengths were more apparent. He gave up the gum on his own before the end of the school year. I was so wrong, and Cindy was so right. Well,
Mm.
I would imagine we can all call up a never, something you thought or think should or could never be used as a support in a Montessori classroom.
Oh my goodness. I have to tell you that it brings up stories for me of things that I'm embarrassed that I was on it about, and as we learn more and more, there's room, right? There's room for us
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
creative and think about it differently, and so thank you for that. I really appreciate. Now how can a school, somebody has a never,
Mhm.
and how does a school approach a never?
Over time, I learned to ask, what would it take to provide the child with the right kind and right amount of support?
Hmm.
As a Montessorian, I know there are so many different ways to change the environment in the service of a child. So, here are some solutions to challenges when I've needed to ask, what would it take? So, for various sensory needs, particularly at the primary level, instead of gum, children can have access to crunchy food that will serve the same purpose all throughout the morning. Same with elementary, same with upper elementary. Middle schoolers are crunching all the time. uh, Other sensory needs, a dedicated private calming spot in the room. We'll often have a corner or a little area, but sometimes the most critical factor in that is that there's some privacy to it when a child is attempting to calm. I've seen tents in classrooms, with flaps or cubes that children can climb into where they're calming themselves in a place that's private and not so public. Weighted blankets are wonderful for sensory needs, and often an office space in the classroom is the right environment for a child who is plummeted with sensory input all through the day and needs a space that they can call their own.
Did you just
For
say an office space? Office
Mhm.
space?
Yeah, a table that might be set up in a place in the room where that child might have materials they need, say if it's lower elementary, upper elementary, a place that if glare is an issue for a child, a place that is not impacted by glare, a place where a child who is sensitive to everything that happens in the room and outside of the room, doesn't a place that doesn't have a straight line of sight to the hallway.
Mhm.
Sometimes children with clear sensory needs do need a space that where they can work, where they can focus, and where they can concentrate. Not
I
all the
d
time, but some of the time.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, I was just listening to a podcast, another podcast, by, I think it was Jenny Sackett was speaking, and she was talking about a time where there had just been a big bombing in her city, and the students and the families were so unnerved and restless, and that she looked and she recognized that they didn't feel safe, and something told her that she should actually assign seats in the classroom. It would give
Mm,
them a sense of safety and of there's something about that felt so dysregulated about the society as a whole, and she did that. She tried it to see if it because her class really was struggling to to normalize, and
mhm,
she did that for them as an experiment, as a gift,
mhm,
and she
mhm,
saw that it actually soothed them so much to know where they were going. Now, I don't think that that's a typical experience for children. I think that the choice of autonomy and being able to choose and having the different place to sit depending on what they're doing and do they want to be near the window or I'm not at all. I want to be very clear advocating for that all the time. But it's an example of really looking to meet the needs and being willing to approach a never and
mhm,
saying,
mhm,
"Okay, what what it what is really the need here? How do we meet the need?"
mhm.
So I really appreciate that.
Some other solutions to nevers for children who are having extreme difficulty with transitions, early entry in the classroom to settle before the day begins, and a solution that is not typical at all, but sometimes might work for a particular child, moving classrooms for lunch, having lunch in a different classroom. Sometimes that will be the answer for a child who's having a lot of difficulty in a particular place for a variety of reasons.
Mm.
Sometimes when kids get stuck in skill development, a specialist's guidance or a specialist presence in the room is a never that should be discarded and say, this is what we might need at this point in time so that we can serve this child well. When we talk about children with challenges, we don't always talk about children with medical conditions, but there are many of them. And sometimes children are in and out of school for periods of time. And so in that situation, we need to adapt. We can't say the child must attend school a certain number of days to benefit from a Montessori education. And we need to have flexible plans for home instruction and also so that the child can have a continued connection to the classroom community. I'm thinking of this specifically for children in cancer treatment. Being connected to the classroom, still being a part of that community is a lifeline. It's really, really important.
Mm, perfect. I mean, really, I think that's such a good list and so practical. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so number 5.
Number 5, data is an objective mirror. We describe the Montessori method as based in science. Yet, we tend to talk about needs and growth in generalities and not specifically. I hear, I tried everything, and I ask, well, what led you to conclude that what you did wasn't working? And I also hear, oh, yeah, it's fine now. And then I say, tell me, what does fine mean? And I often get quizzical looks from teachers and guides when I'm asking these questions. Data is factual information that's collected and analyzed to form insights and make decisions. And researchers tell us that we must measure what matters. And there are many, many ways to do that through a Montessori lens. If we often wonder about the speech and expressive language of 3-year-olds who are new to the CASA, and very often it's difficult to understand what they're saying. We're so very busy watching their faces and their bodies to try and figure out what they're communicating. I'm asked, what is typical development? What might be a delay? When should a speech language specialist become involved? And so we collect data. I share a speech sound development chart, and I prefer what's known as the Sander chart, and I can provide that for the podcast notes. And we check what sound should be in place at this point in time for the child. And then I ask the adults in the classroom to maintain a 2-week record on a clipboard. And each day the adult records 2 of the child's utterances, phonetically and the intended words, what the child was hoping to communicate, as long as you can figure that out. And usually people get pretty good at that. So after the 2 weeks, 2 adults, 10 days, so we have 20 language samples, we check off the sounds that are present in the child's speech. And then we have a better sense of if the child's articulation, the sounds they are using in their language, is within developmental expectations. Next, we compare the child's language with anticipated developmental milestones. And those are available online. The ASHA site, which is the American Speech and Hearing Association site, is really the gold standard source. And so we're looking at what's the average number of words in what the child is saying. How does the child ask a question? Does the child use ing in their formation of verbs? Is the child using plural s for nouns? And so we can get a sense of whether the child's expressive language is below, within, or above expectations by comparing these 20 language samples we have to developmental expectations. We can support the child's development by adjusting the number of words you use when you give directions. It should be 1 or 2 more words than what the child produces themselves. We can give the child extra time to respond. That's such a easy adaptation. And sometimes time makes all the difference for a child with their expressive language. And we can use reflective speech to repeat and expand what the child says. And then, if you suspect delayed or disordered development, you can discuss a speech language evaluation with the family. Guides will say to me, well, what's the difference between a delay and a disorder? A delay is a lag in development, but it follows the typical sequence. So we're back to the point where you need to know what the sequence of development should be. A disorder is atypical development, and the communication is disrupted across settings, home and in school. And a quote that I like a lot about data, it comes from Dr. Montessori, and she gives us this advice in the Advanced Montessori Method, Volume 1. And she says, the vision of the teacher should be at once precise like that of the scientist and spiritual like that of the saint. The preparation for science and the preparation for sanctity should form a new soul, for the attitude of the teacher should be at once positive, scientific, and spiritual.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. So I think for many Montessorians, they come into education, they have a heart for children, they want to serve humanity, and data and research, that can feel a little bit scary. So, can you talk to us about how we can create precise data for ourselves? You gave a beautiful example, but eh, as somebody who's new to these conversations, can you talk about bringing precision to data
hmm
collection?
I can. And the first example of taking language samples is a kind of level one collection. This is a little more involved. So, suppose we're planning an intervention for a young child who is presenting with tantrums at drop off, and we believe that the unmet need is wanting continued access to the caregiver. Our hypothesis is that the lagging skill is the child's ability to separate from their caregiver, and we want to see a change in the child's ability to manage the morning separation. That's where we are in our thinking. So we need to determine the baseline or starting point, and we need to design the intervention. And the intervention will be what will happen, how often it will happen, and for how long. All those points are important. And then after the intervention, we'll assess again to see what has changed. No different than when we're doing skill development, right? Before, during, and after. So the data will let us know if the intervention worked. And if it did, that's great. We can move forward. If it did not, we want to rethink aspects of the intervention and try it a second time before abandoning that intervention as ineffective. And if we don't get the hoped for results, then we develop a new hypothesis about what gives rise to the challenge and a new intervention. It may not be about separating from the adult. It might be about something that happens within the school building or something that happens after the child comes to school. So, if we're going about this process, the first thing we do is gather baseline information telling us how often the tantrums happen, how intense the tantrums are, and how long the tantrums last. And so, how might we do that? Well, for how often, we might use a calendar. And again, I'll use the same time frame of 2 weeks. For how intense, we can build our own tantrum scale. We don't have to go to the research. We can say a tantrum can be a scale of 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. For how long, we must record in the moment. And that might be a phone in your pocket or an observer timing the reactive behavior from a distance. Once we have that information, we need to develop our hypothesis. So we've observed that the caretaker and the child separation routine is not established. We've observed that the caretaker's attempt to appease the crying child keeps that big reaction going. I think we've all seen that at various times. We believe that the child will benefit from the guide's presence and modeling for the caretaker when separating in the morning. Co-regulation with the guide present will provide security, and the caretaker then can be prompted to leave. So, would our intervention look like? The child arrives early, enters the classroom with the caregiver, connects with the guide in the classroom, moves through a goodbye song or a goodbye poem with the teacher and the caregiver, and then the caregiver leaves when given the signal. How long would you implement the intervention? If it's me, I would do it consistently for 2 weeks. I'd take data again. I'd record frequency, intensity, duration of the child's reactive response, and I want to look for decreases that show some improvement. I also remember that I know that once you start an intervention, there may be an increase in the reactive behavior before there is a decrease. There may not be an overnight dramatic improvement, but that doesn't mean that your intervention isn't working. Again, you look for the frequency, the intensity, and the duration to be trending down to know if the intervention is working or not. At the end of the 2 weeks, you decide if you need to continue with the intervention, tweak aspects of it, or develop an entirely new hypothesis about what gives rise to that reactive behavior and how you want to introduce a new response at the start of each school day.
Mm. And I really appreciate the specificity specific
Specificity.
yes, of those examples. Let me try not use that word again. And or practice it. Um of that, and I think it's really important that you're looking for progress, not perfection. And it's something that oftentimes I find people are trying something and it works for a couple days and then it doesn't work and then they throw it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's progress, not perfection. Our brains, I mean, when we have neural pathways that are built around things, it really takes something to change those patterns.
It
And a
does.
lot of times, like you said, it's not going to be instantaneous. This is
No.
work. And it really, I love the idea of gathering data because it becomes less, it can feel personal again when a child,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes we talk with folks about they're not doing this to you, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
not, this is something that is a expression or a need that the child is giving us, and our role is to stay regulated and then to really look to the need of the child, which again comes from our own work and our own spiritual foundation. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And I know we have to wrap up. I really
Mm-hmm.
have, I would love if you are up for it, Andre, to bring you back to do, because this, we got through the five essential truths for children.
We did.
And we have five more for guides and families, which I think candidly, we were talking about one before we started recording, and I want to know what it is. So would you be willing to come back and join us and do another
Of course,
session?
it would be my pleasure.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you here today. I will share with you that there are some podcasts I go back to and listen to again because there's so much in them. And this is definitely one of those
Oh,
where I feel like you've
thank
given
you.
us so much. And for those of you who are listening, I encourage you to do the same because as you take the information, you'll take the information that is appropriate at the moment, and then you listen again in 2 months and, oh my goodness, there's this whole other aspect that will be available to you because this was so content rich. We really appreciate you and all of the work and thought and decades of experience that you've poured into giving us these elements. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. One of the things I love about the Montessori community is that experience and acquired knowledge and wisdom is so valued, and so it's such a joy to share it.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you, we are so grateful for you and for the work that you're doing. I just want to say to our listeners, thank you for spending your time with us today. And thank you for being an educator. Thank you for caring about the world's children and putting we know this is not an easy job, but gosh, I think it is the most important one. And we are so profoundly grateful to be partnering with you in this critical work that is really what's going to save the world. Let's be super clear.
Mhm,
Is
mhm,
this is what's going
mhm.
to save the world. And we ask you to take a look at our website for more information. It's greenspringcenter.org, and you can see the show notes from today's episode. It also has Andre's LinkedIn information so that if you'd like to be in touch with her or bring her in to present to your community or attend her workshop with Jennifer, all of that, and we invite you to check out our other episodes of the podcast. As Dr. Montessori said, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. And we agree. Thank you for all you do. We'll see you next time.
Bye.